Thanks for staying tuned. This is still Sports Desk, and it's now time to turn our attention to the sport of rugby right here that is getting traction in Nigeria in terms of followership as well as participation. And as a result of that, Dr. Adam England is confident that Nigeria has the potentials to produce some of the finest rugby players in the world. Now, the principal of the rugby school in Nigeria is impressed with the talent available in the country, and he has also taken time to praise England Lions captain Mario Itoje, whom he believes Nigeria's aspiring players can emulate. He, however, wants that education is very fundamental to becoming a successful sportsman or woman, and that has always been the advocacy for athletes, that there's life after sports, and there's also the need to be educated so that they can have a very successful career. Adam England is here with me in the studio. Good evening. It's good to have you.
Good evening, Samson. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Let's talk about the sport. I mean, beyond being the principal of Nigerian Rugby School now, you're also a major stakeholder in the sport. And this is a sport that is gaining traction. It's not yet at that level where of maybe football or basketball, but it's gradually growing. The question is, with your experience in the UK and what you've seen on ground, what are those necessary reforms or measures that are needed for Nigerian rugby to really hit those lofty standards?
Well, let's be honest, Samson, that Nigerians are made for rugby. You're a big athletic people, you're great at collaborating, you're superbly resilient, and that's why the England rugby captain at the moment, Mario Itoje, he's from a Nigerian family, and he's got all those qualities. But here in Nigeria, what do you need to do? That's the question, isn't it? And like many things in Nigeria, it is a question of organisation and structure. Where do the coaches come from? Where do the resources come from? Who supplies the rugby pitches? Who supplies the rugby strips, and who supplies, of course, the rugby boots. Now, rugby school in the UK, we are named after a town, not the game of rugby, and the game of rugby is then named after us because it was where it was first played. Of course, rugby school, it's keen to support these developments. So we've already been in touch with the Nigerian Rugby League and Rugby Union people. We want to play some inaugural games on our pitch, which is an International Rugby Board rated pitch. We'll do that in August and September. We also want to do a women's game there because it's Women's Rugby World Cup this year. And believe it or not, there are about 30 or 40 female rugby players in and around Lagos who play regularly. So one of the things we can do, we can start to give structure, we can start to help people with coaching, and we can introduce resources to a nation which, quite frankly, is made for this game.
When you talk about Nigerians made for the game, I quite understand the physical attributes needed, the stamina, the strength, and what have you. We're looking at the perspective of also getting the youths. You know, the saying is you catch them young. Grassroots development is key, and that's what your school is doing now. For other, teaming rugby players in schools, are we looking at some sort of school championship where we have both boys and girls come out, showcase their talents, and the bright spots are, peaked and probably, moved forward to the national team like the Black Stallions and what have you?
You've read my mind, Samson, and of course the way forward is to develop youth. So we'd like to start with setting up a 6-team league within Lagos, but also the idea is, in talking with Nigeria Rugby League and Rugby Union and the women's teams, is to bring the sport to school, catch them young, as you say, and make sure that we capture the imagination of young people. Because rugby is not just a game of physical attributes. Rugby is a game of character. Rugby is a game of resilience, where you'll be tested physically, intellectually, and emotionally. And I think if we can get into schools early, we'll find those youngsters, we've already found quite a few, who have the correct aptitude to play. And that's why once you start with the schools, you create a player pathway, you create a pipeline of talent. And I guess my next step would be speaking to rugby clubs in England to see whether they can sponsor some of these youngsters to go to the UK and other nations to play the game at professional or semi-professional level.
You preempted my next question, and that is, more often than not, one of the challenges that plague sports in Nigeria, Africa, is usually the issue of funding. And when you talk about, a sport like rugby, that those who would say the bigger sports in quote now, like football, or the more popular sports, let's put it that way, like football, do not even get enough funding. How much more rugby? I know quite well that, the pitches, the kits, and what have you, first aid treatments for the players, there's really a whole lot that would go into really developing the sport itself. Are we looking at UK rugby academies coming down to Nigeria to collaborate and, you know, have their academies right here so that we can have that synergy between UK rugby and, you know, Nigerian rugby?
You have pretty much captured my vision, Samson, with the word synergy. I think there's already a very close synergy between the UK and Nigeria and many levels of culture. And I think if I can get UK rugby franchises to come here, see the talent, develop that talent pipeline, I have no doubt that there will be sponsorship for players and for clubs. As a school, the other question is what can we do? And of course, it would be difficult to do it this year because it's our first year. But as time goes by, we will of course offer scholarships, and those scholarships will be both academic and sporting. Rugby has a huge social conscience. We know we have to give back to the societies and the communities around us. And one of the easiest ways to do it is to find aspiring rugby players and sponsor them through schools onto either a promising academic career or preferably in this case, a promising professional rugby career.
Okay, as a major stakeholder, you have well experienced, well traveled when it comes to the sport of rugby. The question will be in terms of structure now, what administrative policies do you think should be put in place to ensure that there is the right structure that will be the foundation upon which all of these issues we've talked about can be built upon for rugby to really stack up to that lofty height?
The issues really begin and end with your administrative body, which would be the Nigerian Rugby Football Union. So making sure that first of all the Nigerian RFU is accredited properly, so it's an international body and it's recognised internationally. And then it begins to build those links with the other international bodies. Now, not many people will know this, but there are quite a number of prominent Nigerian rugby players already in England. Over 15 Nigerians have played international rugby for England, and a good number play at first division level. But the problem is, if they wanted to play rugby for the Stallions, as you say, Samson, how do they come back here?
Exactly.
And how are they released by the English Rugby Football Union to come and do this? And I think the first stage in that process is making sure we've got a properly accredited body who begins to organise this so these guys can play for the Stallions, build up the international reputation. And of course, last year, the Stallions were one match away from winning the Big Sevens event.
You probably
and they lost to Algeria in the final. And they lost to Algeria because Algeria were able to bring back a player who plays in the French top 14, which is one of the toughest divisions in the world. And he was a complete star, and he won that final principally for them. And I'm thinking now, if we could do the same for the Stallions, hopefully the next time round, the event is actually this weekend, so it would have to be next year, that the Stallions could win that with their English qualified players. But more importantly, that the Nigerian Rugby Football Union becomes accredited, it gains funding, and it structures and orders the game in this country.
Interesting, it must be said. Well, finally, let's just project into the World Cup itself. The Women's World Cup is taking place this year. South Africa, well, you can't even put them in the category of Africa now. They are right there as world champions. They've defended the title, going for a three-peat next year with the likes of Siya Kolisi in the mix as well. Do you really think they have what it takes to three-peat when it comes to the World Cup itself?
I love the word three-peat. I love the word tripling, Samson. Unequivocally, yes, Kolisi and his colleagues have the attitude, they have numbers on their side. But give Nigeria 50 years, you have numbers on your side. You have 200 million plus people in this country.
That's true.
Who knows what could happen with a proper structure? In 30 or 40 years, could we see Nigeria in the Rugby World Cup final competing against South Africa? I'd like to think so.
That's true. Well, we'll just see how that pans out, especially for the South Africans successfully defending their title. Thank you so much for your time on the show.
My pleasure, Samson. Nice to meet you.
Thank you so much.